According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, rabies is a preventable viral disease of mammals often transmitted through the bite of a rabid animal. The vast majority of rabies cases reported to the CDC annually occur in wild animals like raccoons, skunks, bats, and foxes. While most cases of exposure are between animal to animal, humans have also been exposed by being attacked by rabid animals or being exposed unexpectedly by family pets through a bite or scratch. So what should you do to protect yourself from this deadly disease? Joining us today to talk about it is Dr. Jennifer Federico, Director of the Wake County Animal Center. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
First, what's the biggest misconception about this disease?
So a lot of people think we can test for rabies, and we can test for rabies. However, the animal must be euthanized first. There's no ante-mortem test. So unfortunately, it's much better to have your pets vaccinated, because otherwise we will have to euthanize them to actually test for rabies. So that is the biggest misconception among pet owners. The other second misconception is people feel like if their animals live inside, there's no risk to them. This is especially true among cats and some small breed dogs that owners say, well, they just go outside in the yard and they come back in. But we have so many cases of bats in households, and bats can transmit rabies and therefore expose those animals as well. And you never know if your pet gets outside. So it's better to have them vaccinated and keep them up to date.
And I'm sure you receive, unfortunately, some cases of pet owners knowing that their own pets may have been in contact with a wild animal, and they just tell you, well, you know, the animal did look a little funny, but my dog or cat is okay. You can't just go by their word.
No, unfortunately, if they become exposed to wildlife, ideally we would be able to either trap the wild animal or their pet has killed it and we can test it. Sometimes though, that wildlife runs off and there's no way for us to trap it, and with that exposure, it's assumed positive, which means that not having the animal means it's positive, and now we have to treat their animals as exposed. And that's really frustrating for owners, especially if they're not up to date, because it gives them only two options really. If their pet is exposed, they either can, at their own cost, quarantine their animal for 6 months at a private veterinary facility, which will cost upwards of $5,000 is what we're getting estimates for, even up to almost $10,000, or euthanize their pet. And it's two really awful options to have.
It is.
And those are just for unvaccinated pets. If they're vaccinated, they just go and get a booster and they're good to go. So you really want them to be vaccinated.
Definitely. While most people talk about rabies prevention during the warmer months, and it's obvious because more folks are outdoors, going through wooded areas, what have you, even letting their pets run free in the rural parts of the county, people need to understand that this virus just doesn't sit dormant during the winter months.
No, it doesn't. It's year-round, and you can be exposed at any time of the year. So no matter what time of the year, you need to take the same precautions.
So when there is a case of a possible rabid animal found in anyone's community, neighborhood, what is the process to verify that if the animal is rabid?
So if we're talking about wildlife, animal control officers will go out and get the wild animal if available. If they can trap it, it comes to the animal center. It is humanely euthanized and then sent to the state lab for rabies testing. Once we get those results back, we can let the family and the pet owners know, or if the owners were exposed. That is the step if it's a wild animal. If it is a domestic animal, if your dog bites another dog, we're not quarantining your dog. If your dog bites you or another person, we will quarantine a dog or cat for 10 days. If they don't show signs of rabies within those 10 days, they're not spreading the virus at that time, and you're safe, and then we release the animal back to the owner.
And what are some of the signs during this quarantine period that you look for?
We look for any signs of neurological disorders such as ataxia, so stumbling around, aggression, just changes in behavior is really what we're looking for. And we don't vaccinate them on intake for rabies until they finish their quarantine, because even some vaccine reactions could look similar to rabies, and you don't want to take that chance of making that mistake.
So what can citizens do to protect themselves and their pets?
keep your pets up to date all the time. It is the most important preventive care for your animal. If you just put it like an index card on your fridge with your rabies dates, because you don't want to ever be overdue. So that's for your pets. The other thing for your pets is making sure that they're under your control. If they're running free, you don't know if they're getting exposed to wildlife. Keep them on a leash. Watch them if they're out in your yard, if it's not fenced. Take those precautions. As far as people, teach your children not to go up and play with wild animals. And when I say wild animals, that includes unknown animals. So the stray kitten, the feral cat, could all be vectors. So call animal control, let them pick up the strays so your family's protected. And also if you see any wildlife that is acting abnormal, and when I say abnormal, if it's more aggressive, if it's out during the day acting abnormally, call animal control. They're the best ones to come out and evaluate that wildlife to say, yes, this is something that I'm worried about for rabies, or no, this is normal behavior. But don't bring the wildlife in your house. Just leave it out where it belongs and appreciate it from afar.
Now, is it true that most wildlife, such as raccoons, possums, if you see it during the day, that is probably not normal in neighborhoods if they are not afraid to approach you during the day?
Yes, but dusk is a little different. So we sometimes have people call it dusk, and that's when sometimes the moms will go out. So animal control is the best to say yes or no, and depending on what that animal is doing, but never approach it, never try to touch it. If it's hurt, leave it, call animal control, because that's even more of a risk factor for you to get bit.
Now, what if a pet comes in contact with a rabid or suspected rabid animal, and the pet owner notices this, whether it's a fight or what have you? What is the best way owners should prepare that animal to be taken to your center?
So first, you want to call animal control. Let them know what happened, so animal control can come get the wildlife. Then they'll also talk to the owner and say, okay, is your pet up to date on rabies? They'll look at the documentation and your proof. If your pet's up to date on rabies, they'll say, okay, you know what? Go to your veterinarian within 3 days and get a booster. That's it. That's all that will need to be done with your pet. Now, if the pet is not up to date on rabies, they'll get the wildlife tested and then tell them about quarantining or euthanasia.
So how can citizens find out more about this important health issue?
So the CDC has a wonderful website at cdc.gov, and citizens should also be having annual visits with their veterinarian, and your veterinarian is a great resource for information on how to protect your pet.
Dr. Jennifer Federico, Director of the Wake County Animal Center, thanks again for being here.
Thank you.